The hallway rug curled slightly near the dining room door, just enough for my boot to catch. I steadied myself, hand brushing the frame heart, already uneasy. I hadn't planned to arrive late, but I'd taken the long way around the block stalling, I suppose. I wasn't ready to see Amber. Not after this morning. Not after what she said. Not after what she did. I was about to knock to announce myself like a guest in a house I used to own when I heard Seth's voice cut through the laughter. My wife put her in her place so she'd finally shut up. Laughter followed. Amber's high, sharp cackle. A man I didn't know chuckled. Silver clinked against ceramic. Forks hit plates. And Seth, my son, laughed again, as if he hadn't watched Amber shove the cabinet door into my cheek just hours ago. I pressed my palm against the doorframe and exhaled once slow. Then I opened the door. The room fell quiet. Amber looked up first. Her eyes darted to my glasses, lingered a second too long. She gave a tight-lipped smile. Seth didn't stand, didn't speak. Just shifted in his seat, as if I'd interrupted a perfectly pleasant evening. 7 people sat around the long table. Someone had lit candles. There was music playing low jazz, I think. No one moved. There was no chair left. I looked for a space, there wasn't one. Vanessa, Amber's sister, was seated in what used to be my spot. My name card was nowhere in sight. Not that I expected one. I didn't expect much anymore. I shrugged off my coat and folded it over my arm. No one offered to take it. Then I stepped to the edge of the room and waited. Just long enough for someone to say something. Anything. No one did. So I turned toward the hallway toward the back, where the folding chairs were stored next to the water heater. I would find my own way in, like I always had. The folding chair creaked when I lifted it from behind the laundry door. I brushed off a layer of dust with my sleeve and carried it back into the dining room. No one turned to look. I moved slowly, careful not to scrape the legs against the floor. I placed the chair near the far corner of the table, close enough to hear them, but just outside the halo of candlelight. The edge. That's where I fit now. I lowered myself into the seat with a quiet breath and smoothed my skirt over my knees. Amber was in the middle of a story about her conference in Chicago. Something about a keynote speaker who was so unqualified, it was painful. The table laughed again. Seth passed the salt without looking at me. His hand brushed Amber's. She didn't pull away. A bottle of wine floated down the table, passed from hand to hand. When it reached me, I reached for a glass, but a woman I didn't know pulled it back quickly. "Oh, sorry," she said, blinking. That was for Vanessa. She turned and poured it into the glass next to her. I folded my hands in my lap. The warmth of the room didn't reach my corner. I watched them all eating, talking, refilling their glasses like I wasn't there. No one asked how I was. No one asked about the bruise. I let my eyes wander. Amber had redecorated since I was last here. The paint was new lighter. The rug was gone. A cold tile stretched underfoot. But what stopped me was the mantel. There used to be a row of family photos, school pictures, a wedding portrait of Seth and Amber, a photo of me holding Seth as a baby. That one always sat in the center, flanked by birthdays and holidays. Now, it was gone. All of them were. Replaced by a gold-framed mirror and a pair of marble candlesticks. Amber laughed again, too loud this time. Seth leaned closer, said something that made her giggle. I looked down at my plate, then at my hands. They hadn't even bothered to set one for me. The morning had started, like most others, quiet, but tense, the kind of quiet that hides sharp edges. I was in the kitchen rinsing coffee cups when Amber came in with that brittle tone that meant something was brewing. "You used the last of the milk again," she said, pulling open the fridge. "I'll pick some up later," I answered. My voice was steady, polite. It always was. The fridge door slammed so hard the condiments rattled. "You say that every time." I turned slightly, hands. still wet, unsure what I was supposed to say next. I'd been living in this uneasy balance for months, careful steps, measured words. I never raised my voice. It didn't help. Amber moved toward the counter, muttering under her breath. I bent to retrieve a spoon that had fallen, and when I stood up, the cabinet door she'd just swung shut caught the side of my face. The impact was sudden, dull. "Watch where you stand," she said flatly. I touched my cheek, more surprised than hurt. The sting came after. Seth was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. I waited for him to look up, to say something, to do anything. He didn't. The silence stretched until it felt like air had weight. I straightened and said nothing. I wanted to ask why, to make them see me, but my throat closed around the words. Instead, I reached for my purse, set the cup in the sink, and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Seth asked without looking up. "For some air," I said. It wasn't until I caught my reflection in the car window that I saw the mark darkening beneath my eye. I sat behind the wheel, hands trembling on the steering wheel, and waited for the ache to settle. By the time I started the engine, I knew I wouldn't be staying long. The heat of the dining room became too much, too many voices, too many forks clinking, too many places I didn't belong. I stood quietly, slipped out through the back door, and let the cold air cut through the fog behind my eyes. The porch light buzzed above me, a faint flicker barely illuminating the gravel path. My car sat 2 blocks away, parked near the end of the cul-de-sac. Amber had told me earlier, flatly, that the driveway would be full. Her yoga group needed it. As if I were the delivery woman, not the woman who'd once paid the first mortgage on this house. I leaned against the railing and pulled out my phone. 2 missed calls from Dolores, my sister. 1 message from my pharmacist. And 1 unread text from my lawyer, Marla. "The house deed is still in your name. Do you want to move forward?" I stared at it for a long time. Amber didn't know. Seth either. Years ago, after Henry died, I had refinanced quietly, kept the deed in my name after the restructure, even after Seth and Amber moved in. We'd agreed it was temporary, that I'd move in for a few months to help with the baby, that I'd always have a place here. And now I sat in a folding chair at the corner of a table in a house I legally owned, waiting for someone to ask if I needed anything. No one had. I glanced through the window. Amber leaned in close to Seth, whispering something. He laughed, that same soft laugh he used when he wanted someone to think he was listening. Vanessa poured herself more wine. My seat was still empty. No plate, no glass, just space. The air was sharp in my lungs. I didn't respond to Marla's text. Not yet. But I didn't delete it either. Instead, I opened the old app connected to the porch camera, the one Seth had told me to remove last winter. I never did. Out of habit, I tapped into the last 24 hours of motion. And that's when I saw it. By the time I got back to my apartment, the bruise had darkened. I didn't bother turning on the overhead light, just slipped off my shoes, tossed my coat across the back of the chair, and sat down at the small table by the window. The only sound was the refrigerator humming behind me. I opened my laptop and logged into the old email I rarely used anymore, the one tied to accounts I hadn't updated in years. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, only that I needed something to hold on to. And there it was, buried under newsletters and spam. Motion alert kitchen camera. 7:18 a.m. I'd forgotten those still came through. Seth had told me to remove the camera last December, said it made Amber uncomfortable. I told him I would, but I didn't. My hands moved slower than usual as I clicked the link. The footage loaded, grainy, but clear enough. I saw myself standing in the kitchen doorway, reaching for the grocery bag. Amber moved past the camera, fast and deliberate. The door swung wide, hard, striking the side of my face. She didn't flinch. She didn't pause. Seth stood a few feet behind her. He looked up for a moment, saw everything, and then looked right back down at his phone. I sat there watching it again and again until I felt nothing. No heat, no tremble. Just the cold clarity that comes when someone finally shows you exactly who they are. I downloaded the clip and saved it to a folder marked Personal. Then I changed the file name. Quiet isn't consent. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair. The bruise still throbbed gently under my eye, but it no longer felt like a wound. It felt like proof. I didn't call anyone, didn't text Marla yet. But something had shifted. Something had settled. The next morning I was waiting at the cafe when Marla walked in, briefcase in hand. Marla slid into the booth across from me, set down her briefcase, and gave me a quick, knowing nod. She didn't waste time with small talk. That's why I liked her. I pushed the laptop across the table, the file already open, and paused at the frame that mattered most. Amber mid-motion door angled toward my face. I let it play once. Then I clicked it again and again without saying a word. Marla didn't blink. "Do you want to press charges?" she asked calmly. "No," I said. "Not yet." She nodded, closed the laptop gently, and opened her folder. "Then let's start with what you own." I pulled out the deed from my bag, the original still in my name. She added it to her stack. Then came the trust documents, the draft. I never filed the notes from Henry's old accounts I'd quietly restructured after his death. Marla flipped through the papers, fast but careful. "And the second account, they don't know it exists." "Perfect," she said, without looking up. "They will?" The waitress brought us coffee, and we let her walk away before speaking again. I sipped slowly, letting the warmth settle my nerves. "Is this about money?" Marla asked. "No," I said. "It's about not being erased." She didn't need more than that. We filled out the necessary release forms, updated the beneficiary details, transferred the title of the house into the trust. Marla highlighted the deadlines. I initialed where she pointed. I didn't hesitate once. "I'll send them formal notice within the week," she said. "You'll be copied on everything. Make it clear," I told her. "This isn't a warning." Marla's eyes met mine. Understood. By the time I stepped outside, the sun had climbed high enough to cast light through the bare trees. I tucked the signed copies into my coat pocket and walked the long way back to the car, past the bookstore Henry used to love, past the bakery I hadn't visited since Amber's shower. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I didn't look. 3 days passed without a word. Not a message, not a call, not even one of Amber's clipped voicemails about scheduling or errands. I thought maybe they hadn't noticed. Maybe the paperwork hadn't reached them yet. Maybe the trust filings were still making their way through the system. Then the phone rang. Amber's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring once before answering. "You froze the house account." She barked, not even waiting for a greeting. "Seth's credit cards aren't working. We couldn't pay the contractor this morning. What is going on?" I didn't respond. "We have bills to pay, Lorraine. This is a family house." I pressed end. She didn't call again. That evening, just after the street lamps buzzed on the motion alert lit up my phone. The camera feed from the front door loaded slowly, then sharpened into view. Seth stood there. He didn't knock. He didn't say anything. He just looked directly at the lens, his expression unreadable. There was no anger, no pleading, just stillness. Like he wanted me to see him but wasn't ready to speak. Or maybe he thought standing there would be enough? I watched from the sofa, the screen glowing cold in my hand. He stayed for a while, long enough for the light above the door to cycle off, then back on again. And then he left. No text, no follow-up, just silence. And that heavy, unfinished kind of silence that comes when someone realizes the rules have changed and they're not sure how to play anymore. I didn't sleep that night, but I wasn't restless. I felt something settle instead, something shift inside me like a door I didn't know I'd left open had finally closed. The next morning, I sent Marla the final approvals. We moved ahead with the full transfer. Amber's birthday was coming up. I hadn't forgotten. I just had something different in mind this year. Amber's birthday used to be something I planned down to the napkins. I remembered which wine she liked, which bakery made her preferred sponge, which songs she played on. Repeat the week before. I used to call the florist myself, not because she asked, but because I wanted to keep things peaceful. This year, I sent nothing. No flowers, no cake, no RSVP. Just a manila envelope delivered by courier to the house I still legally controlled. Inside, a copy of the new deed freshly signed and transferred into the trust, my name sealed above theirs. Next to it, a still frame printed in glossy color. Amber caught mid-motion door, angled into my face, the timestamp clear. And beneath those, a note I'd folded, once clean and sharp. Since I wasn't invited last time, I thought I'd return what you missed. I didn't expect a reply. I didn't need one. By evening, I checked the porch camera again. Motion detected. A man with a toolbox stood by the front door removing the old lock. A new system being installed. A new code. But the foundation underneath hadn't changed. The house still answered to me. I watched the technician carry his ladder back to the truck, unaware that the paperwork had already shifted beneath their feet. By the time they figured it out, the leverage would be gone. They could change the locks all they wanted. They were too late. I leaned back, letting the stillness of my apartment wrap around me. The quiet didn't feel like absence anymore. It felt like choice, a quiet I owned. I spent the rest of the night reading the envelope's tracking receipt tucked under my mug. I imagined Amber opening it, face-tight eyes darting to Seth across the table. No candles, no music, no control. And I imagined them both wondering how long I'd been planning this, how long I'd been watching. They'd get their answer soon enough. 2 weeks later, I returned to the house with a folded court order in my bag and the sheriff's car pulling in just behind me. A court officer stepped out, first clipboard in hand, efficient and quiet. There were no crowds, no neighbors watching. Just the house sitting there, under the weight of its own silence, pretending it still belonged to someone else. Amber and Seth weren't home. The driveway was empty, except for the contractor's dumpster that had been sitting there for months. The grass had already started to creep over the edges of the walkway. For the first time in years, I wasn't nervous to step inside. The door opened easily. They'd changed the lock once, but not the alarm code. The system still recognized me. A dull chime greeted us, polite as ever. My name was still on everything: deed, insurance, taxes, utilities. All of it. The paperwork Marla had filed left no room for confusion. The trust now owned the property, and I was its only executor. I walked through each room slowly, the way one revisits an old photograph, careful, detached. The dining table gleamed under a coat of polish I didn't recognize. The candles on the mantel were new, but the shelf above them was mine. I ran a hand along the wood, tracing the faint groove where Henry's hammer had slipped the day he hung it. I gathered what mattered: a small box of my husband's tools, a jewelry case that had belonged to my mother, the photo of us at the lake house, Henry in his cap, me laughing at something that doesn't matter anymore. Everything else could stay. Good. The furniture, the curtains, the noise. Before I left, I taped a printed notice to the inside of the front door. Notice to vacate, property sold. Vacate within 30 days. Below it, my signature, clean and final. Outside, the for sale sign caught the wind and rattled faintly against its post. I stood for a moment on the porch listening. There was no apology in that house anymore. The next morning, the realtor's number would go live, and by afternoon, the listing would already have an offer. The first night in my new apartment, I slept with the window cracked open. There was no sound but the soft hum of the building settling and the occasional shuffle of someone in the hall. No shouting, no slamming doors, no pretending. Just space. The place is small, but it's mine. It smells of clean linen and warm stone, the kind that rises from sunlit countertops after an afternoon of stillness. I've put up exactly one photograph, a black and white from years ago, me and Henry standing in front of his old truck, before Seth was even a thought. We were young, full of plans, the kind that had nothing to do with trust funds or family dinners filled with strangers. My bruises are gone now. The skin under my eye has returned to its usual pale tone. When I look in the mirror, I don't see a wound. I see a woman who finally stopped asking to be seen. The trust is locked in. The deed has transferred. The house is under contract pending inspection. The couple who made the offer have 2 daughters and a rescue dog, and they wanted a home with a real porch swing. I told the realtor they could keep the one Henry installed. I never liked sitting on it alone. I get messages now and then, voicemails from mutual acquaintances, old neighbors who had no idea and hope everything's all right. I listen sometimes. Most of the time I don't. Tonight Seth called. Just once. The screen lit up with his name, the same name I wrote on a birth certificate with shaking hands so many years ago. I watched it ring, watched it go silent. Then I set the phone face down and poured myself a cup of tea. There was no anger in the silence that followed. Just distance. The kind that can't be crossed with apologies offered too late or voices raised too often. I didn't need the sound of his voice anymore. I didn't need him to understand. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't need a seat at anyone's table.